I'd say the core theme of my channel is nostalgia. Whether we're talking games or movies, we like reflecting on things from the past, things that remind us of a simpler time. Sometimes you have a unique personal attachment to a specific media, and that's what I wanted to share today. I just wanted to talk about some of the most nostalgic things to me, which are video stores and live cable TV. As you can see here, or already know by now, I have a pretty big movie collection. The collection serves a unique purpose. Foremost, it's a set for my YouTube videos, sort of a show and tell, to curate and give historical context to the movies or genres that I'm talking about. But I've come to realize what I've really made here is a shrine of nostalgia. When I was a teen, I owned only a small fraction of what you see here today, but I proudly displayed the tapes in the corner of my room as if it were my own little video store. So perhaps I was recreating my own childhood room here, amped up to 11. Video stores were the prime nostalgic habitat for where most of these memories were born. Back then, we had a local Blockbuster Video, but also some smaller mom-and-pop stores. So if I was looking for a specific movie, sometimes I'd have to visit multiple stores before I found the movie, if at all. I remember one time somebody else checked out The Human Monster with Bela Lugosi, and I couldn't even imagine who else would want to see that. Streaming has made this much more convenient. However, the nostalgic side of me really misses wandering around those mazes of shelves, being surrounded by movies. You'd see one, you go, well, that looks crazy. You turn around, you read the back, and that was all you knew. Maybe the movie's great, maybe it sucked, but there was only one way to find out. So you'd rent it, you'd take it home, and then you'd have to watch it because if you didn't bring it back soon enough, you got that late fee. And while you're dropping it off, you might as well rent something else. I remember as a kid always asking my mom to drive me to the video store. Video stores aren't entirely extinct, but they're much more rare nowadays. Maybe that's another reason I created this shrine, is to show my kids. Already the youngest one likes to sit back here and play video store. So she sits here and goes, what do you want to buy? So that's kind of, my way of passing it on to a younger generation, because otherwise it'll be forgotten. The first classic monster movie I saw was probably King Kong, and it was on TV. And that brings me to another big thing, was TV was the most direct way to see these films, and there was something extra special about seeing a movie on TV because there was a live factor. You had to be there when it was on.
Coming up, TNT's top secret Monster Vision Night continues with another Battle of the Beasties.
And you couldn't choose what movies would play or when.
Tonight, 5 weird sci-fi movies on TNT's Monster Vision.
But if something came on that you were interested in and you had a VCR, it was the most instant way to acquire a movie in your collection at just the cost of a blank tape. Throughout the 90s, I recorded lots of movies on tape, but it never felt official. I always preferred to have the box art and no commercials, but that was a more premium expense. Sometimes I couldn't even afford a blank tape, so I had to recycle them a lot. So you got bored of one movie? Well, just tape over it with something else. And that got interesting too, because sometimes at the tail end, you'd still have the old recording. One time I found an old tape of King Kong. At the end, you get static, like usual, but as the static cleared, there was David Letterman interviewing Bill Murray, and then the static wiped down again, and there was an old cartoon of David the Gnome. So you're just peeling away all these different time periods of your youth. The Sunday newspaper always had a TV guide in it, so every Sunday morning I would run out to the mailbox if my dad wasn't already reading the sports section or whatever. I'd often be the first one out there. I'd grab the paper, immediately get out the TV guide, and then throw the rest on the table. I remember the newspaper had a very distinct smell. I don't know what that is. I think it's the fresh ink, like it just came off the printers. But whatever it is, I always remember that smell. Even today, whenever I get those grocery store circulars, with the ads, I smell that and I immediately think of TNT's Monster Vision. Weird, but I guess that's what you call a sense memory. Now this here is kind of a bad example because this was the type of TV guide you'd buy in a grocery store. I never liked these as much because for most of the week's programming, they just listed all the shows from top to bottom by time. I preferred when it was the grid view, like in the Sunday paper. That way I could scan a particular channel like TNT, and that's exactly what I did. Sometimes I would scan the entire guide, circling any movie that sounded cool, and all you had to go by was a title and a description. Tentacles, suspense melodrama about an octopus terrorizing a California community. That sounds awesome. 1 star? Whose opinion's that? Creature with the atom brain. A scientist creates atomic zombies that terrorize a city. Sounds good to me. Or how about From Hell It Came? A monster tree stump menaces a research team. A monster tree stump? I need to see that. My imagination would take over and create the movie in my mind before I even see it. I'd wait all week and then I'd be disappointed. Lots of these old monster movies were just a bunch of guys in suits talking, and then the monster would show up in the last 10 minutes. It kept me in suspense what the monster was going to look like. Maybe it's stop motion like Ray Harryhausen, or it's going to be a puppet or a person in a costume. You never knew. But nowadays it's so simple. You could look up any movie and see an image, a trailer, anything to quickly assess whether or not it's something you actually want to sit down and watch. So that's something special that's kind of been lost. It's the ritual of just watching some obscure movie without any ability to fast forward, not knowing anything about it except for one sentence. What also made it special to me was the idea that there could possibly be somebody else out there watching that same movie at the same exact time. And it always made me wonder, who was making the programming choices? Who decided 5:15 in the morning was a good time to show The Werewolf? Who was it intended for? I always wondered, who was either just going to bed or just waking up at that time to watch a movie called The Werewolf? There had to be somebody out there. Was it you? Of course, you didn't have to actually be awake. You could set your VCR timer as long as you had a blank tape ready. But with those all-night TNT marathons, I had to make some choices. Do I set the tape to SLP mode that can do 6 hours but worse quality? Or do I set an alarm to wake up and switch the tape? Those were the special kind of nights when that's what I was concerned about. Like, how do I record as many of these movies as possible?
Coming up on Monster Vision, jet pilots are snatched into oblivion.
As I recall, I'd typically try to stay up as late as I could. I'd camp out on the couch in the basement where the TV and VCR was set up. Eventually I'd fall asleep during one of the movies, and that's where a kind of trippy experience would occur, where the movies would enter my dreams, because I'd be hearing them while asleep and visualizing what's happening. Sometimes I'd wake up disoriented to see a wasp woman eating some guy's face off. Like, what's happening? What movie is this? The next morning, I'd check out the tapes. It was kind of like Halloween, going through your trick-or-treat bag to see what you got. Lots of times I wouldn't care to save all the movies because most of them sucked. So using a second VCR, I would copy the ones I wanted onto another tape, sitting there while watching in real time and cutting out the commercials. Today, looking back, I regret cutting out the commercials because sometimes that was the best part.
It's The Legend of Zelda and it's really rad. Those creatures from Ganon are pretty bad.
And then, when all was said and done, sometimes I would go through the extra effort to make my own crappy box art. Of course, nothing was better than having the official tapes. Very few of these tapes you see here I actually owned as a kid. Most of them I got from my friend Mike, others were fan donations, or I got on eBay. The ones that I owned as a kid, and still own, have special sentimental value. The wall of Universal Monsters is like the crown jewels.
Visit your local video retailer and ask for the Universal Studios Monsters Classic Collection. Classic monster titles with a haunting new look at a price to die for.
As a young teen, I had to save up money to buy each of them from Suncoast Video in the mall. I was too young for a job at the time, so the money came from my parents as allowance or doing chores like cutting the lawn, stuff like that. So I might have bought one every other week or once a month. It took a while, but that made them extra special, that I had to earn them. So there was time in between each of them where I'd watch the same ones over and over, and that's how they became etched into my mind. My first introduction to these movies was in the Crestwood House books, which I saw in the library at school. It was a whole series dedicated to the monsters. They were full of misleading information, such as the infamous Godzilla book that told me the lie that King Kong vs. Godzilla had two different endings. One where Godzilla wins and one where Kong wins. Wish it was true, but it's not. And wait a minute, that's not the Wolfman. That's Werewolf of London. But it didn't matter. I was mesmerized. I would read the plot synopsises and visualize the movies in my mind. I looked at all those black and white stills and imagined them in full motion with sound. So that's when it became a video store hunt. And when the video store didn't carry it and renting wasn't an option, I'd have to buy it from Suncoast. The Universal monsters appealed to me on many levels. First of all, they were like comic books to me. Characters with dual personalities, secret identities, capes, masks, special powers, special weaknesses, characters that die and come back, evil masterminds, henchmen. I even once made a whole video comparing superheroes to classic monsters. Beyond that, I simply loved the way the movies looked. The Wolfman's Woods, for example, I would sit there and stare into the background, enchanted by the way the trees fade into a white fog while the foreground sticks out in stark black. I felt immersed in that black and white world. To put it very simply, it just looks good on your TV, especially watching it at night with all the lights out. The black and white glow would envelop the room and in some strange way almost feels like you're there. Also, these movies make me think of a long bygone era when something like that could actually be terrifying to audiences. On top of all that, what intrigued me so much about these movies was that they were the originals. It was like tracing the source of so many Halloween tropes. Ah, the famous Dracula voice. There it was, Bela Lugosi.
I am Dracula.
There was sort of a discovery element to it. As a kid, nobody else I knew was talking about these movies. I felt they didn't get the recognition they deserved, so I made it a mission to tell everybody I knew, and that came into full fruition in the age of YouTube. Now, when people write me and say, "Hey, thanks for introducing me with Monster Madness," that is just the coolest thing to hear. Let's take a little walk around. Let's check this out. So many movies, I don't even know what I own most of the time. So sometimes I'll walk in here and be like, "Hey, do I have that movie?" And then I'm like, whoa, just like a video store. Blood Diner. Look at that cover. Wow, that is a great cover. That probably means it's crap though. All right, let's see what else. Now, this is an example of a tape that I did not own as a kid. These are just ones I remember seeing in the video store. So sometimes when you're collecting, you're sort of reacquiring all these, pieces of your childhood that you're putting back together. Berenstein Bears. Of course, we all know now it's the Berenstain Bears with an A. Yes, it's a real typo. Although I doubt this misspelling on the tape could be the basis for all of us remembering it spelled with an E, or alternate dimension. Seemed every kid I knew back then had Ninja Turtles the movie, and it had that Pizza Hut sponsorship, so it begins with this commercial that's for Pizza Hut, but it, for some reason, has something to do with baseball.
That's why I play in right field, way out where the dandelions grow.
And that song, I always remember that song that has, stayed in my head all these years. So it's funny whenever you meet someone who also remembers that, it's like, yeah, you too. My first Godzilla movie was Monster Zero, and that's the same cover. I remember seeing it in the video store, sitting just like this, and I think the video store that I remember, and the way I visualize in my head, had the same type of wood paneling or similar, And I was a little shorter at the time, but I remember looking up at the tape just like this. This is a box set that I've had as a kid, science fiction classics. Now the word classic implies good, not just old. Metropolis, things to come, sure, those are great, but the others, not so much. But as a kid, I just figured, well, Attack of the Giant Leeches, that's obviously a science fiction classic because it says so on the box. But of course, the real reason is the licensing, because these movies are all public domain. But even the prints are terrible. Metropolis looks awful, and it's recorded in SLP, which makes it even worse. But you know, this was a classic golden age box set, and I just miss being more naive and less critical. It's crazy to think I have movies on Beta, Laserdisc, CED, even 8 and 16 millimeter. This is how I remember the NES games. We always called them Nintendo tapes, even though there was no tape in it. The store always carried them in these plastic cases, and if you were lucky, the manuals would be in there too. I remember collecting the Hammer Dracula series and didn't know what order the movies were in or how many there were because there was no internet to look it up. Back then it was all about movie catalogs, Leonard Maltin books, anything you could find. It's overwhelming to think how much media exists. Back then, I missed out on lots of stuff. Would you believe that back then I never even saw The X-Files or the Batman animated series? I've seen all those shows later, but back then, I don't know what the reasons were. I think it just depended when it was on or what I was doing at the time. But nowadays, you can watch almost anything with only a few clicks. In a way, that's great because you have instant access to so much media, but I find myself wanting to consume more, to try and watch as many things as possible in the shortest time. So on one hand, I could catch up on things I missed out on, but on the other, it kind of cheapens the whole experience. With music, for example, you no longer need to buy an album. You can just subscribe to Apple Music or Spotify and listen to all the stuff you want. Iron Maiden comes out with a new album, I listen to it all the way through, maybe twice, because the next day I'd be listening to something else. And the new Maiden is awesome, as always, but there's some songs on it that didn't do much for me, but maybe with time they will, with more repeated listens. But in the old days, I would have saved up money to buy that album, and that was my album of the week. I would listen to only that album over and over and over again, and songs that I didn't like too much at first would grow on me and become classics. But on the other side of that, there were many other bands that I didn't get to hear back then because I was too busy focusing on one thing at a time. So the question is it better to have access to more all at once, or to have less but appreciate it more? The dictionary defines nostalgia as a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. I can't think of any time in my life when everything was perfect in every single way. So if a time machine existed and I could actually go back to any part of my life, I don't think I would. Maybe to visit, but not to stay. I always want to move forward. But with that said, that selective memory over little things can be a positive experience. Whenever you're having a bad day, you can turn to something familiar for just a little comfort. No matter who you are, I know that you and I could find something to talk about that we both remember. That's how nostalgia connects people. There might come a time when I have to sell all this stuff. Probably not for a while, but it's something that I don't disregard, that nothing lasts forever. I'm happy to have been able to preserve it through my videos. I love being able to share this stuff. I hope to be able to do this as long as I can. This channel is all about remembering a simpler time, and if that's the kind of stuff you want to see, well, stay tuned.